9 seconds. That was the gap between shots that could erase 3,000 lives, and I was counting them out loud in my head, while a woman with iron-grey eyes gave the order in a voice that never rose. "Margaret," she said, "let it go." I am Commodore Adrian Vex, and in 80 years serving a council built on rules 80,000 years old, I had never stood so close to watching one of those rules finish dying. To explain how I got onto that bridge, I have to go back 3 weeks, to a report that stopped my breath cold. A farming colony called Halberd 3, home to 2 million humans, turned to a sphere of glass in 9 minutes. The attacker, the Krell Dominion, hadn't declared anything. They arrived, fired, left. Their ambassador walked into our chamber the next morning, paid a fine of 4,000 credits, and apologized for the inconvenience. 4,000 credits. That was what our laws said 2 million lives were worth, and had said for 80,000 years. What frightened me wasn't the Krell. It was the human silence that followed. Their ambassador, Helen Carter, sat through the morning session without moving, then walked out and never returned. No protest, no demand, and within 72 hours, every human trade channel had gone dark, every diplomat recalled home, every merchant fleet turned around mid-voyage. My director, a grey Thalen named Vel who had watched 17 species learn to bend to our shape, told me the humans alone never had. He pressed a data crystal into my hand, still warm. "Go to Earth," he said. "Watch, don't interfere." 6 days later, my ship dropped out above Jupiter, and every assumption I carried about human weakness came apart at once. The shipyard stretched for thousands of kilometers, lit by more welding sparks than there were stars behind it, and at its center hung something that broke my sense of scale the way a mountain breaks a person's sense of a stone. Council law-capped warships at 14 megatons. This one was 6 times that and still unfinished, its weapon spine already whole, running the hull's length like a bone under skin. A voice came over my comm, unhurried. "Welcome to Sol System, Commodore. We've been expecting you." Admiral Yona Reyes met me at the ramp herself, a small silver pin shaped like a tree on her collar, and for an hour she hid nothing. The armor was an ally our archives had no name for. The engines vectored in ways no council hull could survive. And the cannon, a kilometer of rail that would fling a slug at half the speed of light. No warhead required, none needed. "We call it the Sundering Lance," she said. Council law had banned weapons like it 50,000 years before humans learned to farm. "You understand this violates Protocol 17, I said. She didn't blink. The Krell were bound by the protocol against unprovoked bombardment too. They paid 4,000 credits. We've decided a rule only means something when both sides agree it does. We're tired of agreeing alone." That night she poured me tea and slid a tablet across the table, a column of names scrolling without end. "The dead of Halberd 3, she said. 2,147,312. Farmers, teachers, somebody's children." She let it run a long time before speaking again. "This isn't anger, Commodore. Anger burns out fast. We're simply finished pretending your rules protect anyone who isn't already strong enough not to need them." Her voice never climbed. "And we're about to show the rest of the galaxy exactly what that means." I asked why one ship instead of a fleet. "A fleet asks for a war," she said. "We wanted peace badly enough to build the one thing that would guarantee it without needing an empire to hold it." I asked if her crew feared dying for it, that small, warmthless smile again. "We made our peace with that before we ever came aboard. The waiting was the hard part. Now that the day's here, most of us feel something closer to relief." 5 days out, we crossed into Krell space, and the Council sent one last transmission. "Stand down." The Krell had raised their reparations to 8,000 credits. The matter was closed. Reyes had it logged for the record and gave no reply. The ship didn't slow by a fraction. 3 Krell cruisers moved to intercept, forming the ceremonial arc. 1,000 years of treaty had taught them a proper fight should open with. They fired warning shots, deliberately wide, the polite first line of a civilized war. Reyes watched the bolts cross her viewport without a flicker. "Margaret, let it go." The lead cruiser didn't burn or break apart. It was simply absent, replaced by a slow bloom of vapor that 9 seconds earlier had been 3,000 people. The second ship vanished the same way before its captain finished his warning broadcast. The third ran for the Krell homeworld. We didn't chase it. We were already headed there. 847 warships waited above the capital, the whole of the Krell home fleet, more firepower gathered in one place than I had seen in my entire career. They opened fire in coordinated waves that turned our forward sensors solid red, and the hull didn't shudder. Reyes never once turned the lance on the fleet itself. She let the secondary batteries handle that while the great guns stayed fixed on what actually mattered, the shipyards. One by one, the orbital forges that had armed the Krell Empire for 2 centuries stopped existing, precise, unhurried, the cities beneath left untouched. When the First Minister's surrender came through, shaking and unconditional, Reyes read her terms without triumph, then told him the demonstration would run 4 hours longer regardless. Not from doubt, she said, but because the rest of the galaxy needed to see it plainly enough that no one would ever make her repeat it. 11 days after that I stood before the full council, every seat filled, an audience of trillions watching from 1,000 worlds, and told them what I'd promised Director Vell I would, the whole truth, undiplomatic. I told them about Henry Lell, the navigator, who wanted his family to know if he didn't come home that he'd gone by choice and not by order, and that he was sorry about a dog named Biscuit who would probably outlive him. I told them what Reyes had said about the price we'd set on Halberd 3, and I told them our system had never been strong, only old, and only ever built to protect the already powerful. We can spend a century punishing humanity for showing us this, I said, and fail, and break ourselves in the failing. Or we can admit the rules were broken long before they arrived, and finally build ones that hold for everyone. The chamber stayed silent long enough that I heard my own claws against the rail. The reforms took months, equal votes for every tier, reparations measured against what a life is actually worth. Humanity sat through every session, asked for nothing extra, never once mentioned the ship, and behaved as though none of it had happened. I retired soon after to a small house above the water on my homeworld, where I keep a garden of plants almost no one grows anymore. Most evenings I don't think about any of it, but sometimes, when the wind comes off the sea and the light turns gold before it turns dark, I remember exactly what 9 seconds of silence sounds like on a bridge where no one is afraid anymore. I understand now that it was never really silence. It was a species finally being heard, and somewhere above a yellow star, in a dry dock full of maintenance lights, that ship is still sleeping, waiting to see if it will ever need to speak again.